So I think what terrifies me the most is that people who are most skeptical, most anxious, most conservative about some of the risks and questions of AI will just pull themselves out of the narrative entirely, and let the space be shaped by people who are more comfortable playing fast and loose with those things.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome to AI and the Future of Work, episode 345. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. If you like what we do, join our newsletter. We've now been publishing it for, 5 or 6 months, and it gives you an opportunity to meet other members of the community. And here's some tips and tricks, maybe some AI fun facts that don't always make it into the main show. There's a link in the show notes. Also, if you like what we do, tell a friend. Give us a like and a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you leave a comment, I just may share it in an upcoming episode like this one from Jeff in Annapolis, Maryland. Thank you, Jeff, who's the head of HR at a consumer packaged goods company. Jeff's favorite episode is the one from last May about the future of talent management with the CEO of Unicorn Turing, Jonathan Siddharth. I love that conversation. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on the show. Of course, the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact. Today's fun fact comes from Garrett DeVink and Natasha Tiku, who write in the Washington Post Online that AI execs used to beg for regulation, but not anymore. Sam Altman, CEO of ChatGPT maker OpenAI, warned at a Senate hearing this past week that requiring government approval to release powerful artificial intelligence software would be disastrous for the United States lead in the technology. It was a striking reversal after his comments at a Senate hearing 2 years back when he listed creating a new agency to license the technology as his number one recommendation for making sure AI was safe. Critics of the new stance warn that AI technology is already causing harm. Researchers have shown that AI systems can become infused with racism and other biases from the data they've been trained on. In February, Google's AI lab DeepMind scrapped a long-held pledge not to develop AI that would be used for weapons or surveillance. There are many more examples like that we should be paying attention to. Of course, we'll link to the full article in today's show notes. My commentary: responsible use of AI ultimately will accelerate, not decelerate innovation. No AI vendors disagree with the need to protect humans from being harmed directly or indirectly by AI. We should stop waiting for governments, ours or anyone else's, to pass legislation. AI vendors need to lead by example. Let's tell governments how AI is being regulated, and let's hold each other accountable. At my company, PeopleRain, we do our best to lead by example. We require every customer to complete an AI guardrails workshop before going into production, where we discuss AI safety explicitly. Responsible AI is everyone's responsibility. Now, shifting to this week's conversation, I've been looking forward to this one. Alex Buder Shapiro is the Chief People Officer at Jasper AI. We were at the HR Tech Transform event together recently when I asked great former guest, Brian Power. If you haven't heard that one, go back in the archives, listen to Brian's episode. I asked him what other great people leaders should be on the podcast. He immediately said Alex. Alex is a must-have guest on the show. We were all inspired by her sessions at Transform. Jasper AI has more than 100,000 customers using its AI-first marketing platform and has raised more than $125 million. Alex is an enlightened people leader with a unique perspective on the role of HR and, more importantly, the future of teams. Having served in the same role for 6 years at Flatiron Health, and prior to that as an HR business partner manager for nearly 8 years at Google, Alex studied political psychology and theater arts at the University of Pennsylvania. Go Quakers. And without any further ado, Alex, welcome to the podcast. Share a bit more about your background and how you get into space.
Gosh, Dan, thank you. I started at Google right out of college, kind of, earlier days, a few years after the company had gone public. And it was like, it was getting to have this masterclass in an organization that's just going through so much change and transformation. And so for me, in the people space, it was already getting to have this bird's eye view of how organizations work and how people can be at the center of how organizations work. And so I got to spend 8 years just watching the evolution and sort of that moment in which Google moved from being this like search company with performance ads. And shortly after I joined, we launched Android and then Chrome, and then thought about the YouTube integration and getting to really think through how you design the structures of the business units and teams to work really effectively as the complexity kind of grew internally. And then I left Google to join a startup called Flatiron Health. 200 people, Series C, New York City, everyone all in like one floor, and really asking this question around what tech could do in a mission-driven, mission-centric environment. And so the company was really founded to think about how to bring a lot of the real-world data and evidence that was occurring in clinical care settings into regulatory decision making. And how do you kind of construct these large-scale data sets using a lot of understanding of what treatment is actually happening and use it to accelerate some of the research that's happening. And so we had this incredible opportunity, I think, to ask ourselves as a people team, how do we bring together people from such different disciplines? How do you bring clinicians and epidemiologists, biostatisticians in with tech and product management to kind of create this outcome that no one thought was possible, of really accelerating the way that research gets done? And the company got to have that successful acceleration too, and go through its own hypergrowth and acquisition and really build out into a large and global scale organization. And then I'm this junkie for getting to learn something that I haven't learned before, and getting to really understand at that bird's eye view of what change is happening. And so when I was leaving Flatiron, I talked to maybe like 30 CEOs and founders, and just trying to figure out like, what do I want to do next? And what is the thing that I don't yet know? And I would say it was really like, it was the exact 6 months after ChatGPT was released. And so the first half of my job search, everyone wanted to talk about RTO and hybrid work and how was I going to get people back into the office. And then at some point, through those conversations, CEOs and founders started asking me, well, what are you going to do about AI? And like, how do you think about AI in the workplace? And so when I met the co-founders of Jasper, I thought, oh gosh, this is my bird's eye view moment. This is my chance to get under the hood, and really understand what is going to change my profession as a people leader, the entire profession. I think the way that work gets done, to look at how my customers are adopting AI, to look at how my employees have the opportunity to adopt AI. And so I jumped right in, and it was this moment of transformation for the organization, moving into sort of this enterprise purpose-built, sort of marketing specific platform. And so really getting to understand the adoption curve for teams and organizations at all levels. It's just been, it is a new adventure.
You're part of one of the most iconic leadership cultures ever at Google. I'm sure you couldn't help but be educated and to have it transform your thinking. What would you say are the leadership lessons that you take away from Google that have kind of informed how you lead, whether it was Flatiron or now Jasper?
And I think that idea of really trying to figure out how to make people work as effectively as they could to kind of bring people to the best of their capabilities and allow that to be the output that the company then is able to create value itself off of, that was so core to how we worked at Google. The idea can come from anywhere. The person had to have the space to build it. The person had to have the vision to create it. And then that's what you later kind of monetized, commercialized, and grew and scaled onto. That felt so core to me, that idea of like, how do you help people do their best work? What does it mean to do best work? How do you measure it? How do you study it? And then how do you optimize it? And that iteration and experimentation culture was also really core, I think, at Google at that time. And it was like the founding of people analytics. And you see that for the first time, this idea that like your employees actually have all these rich data points to provide you, and you can make a set of decisions by learning from them and with them, and creating this kind of virtuous feedback loop and cycle of how you build your own programs as a people team. I think through line in all of my leadership.
Well, that culture has been so written about. There's a whole diaspora of companies that spun out of the Google people culture, and so many companies in Silicon Valley really aspire to create people culture like that. I know it's shifted a little bit, but here we are talking about really a different nature of how employees interact with their employers. I know this was a big theme at the Transform HR Tech event we were at together. How would you describe maybe versus that culture to put Google on the map versus kind of, what we'll call the new employer-employee relationship?
It's so interesting to me because I'd say, first like 15 years of my career, that aligned incentive structure just felt so core to how we worked. And then something really shifted pretty seismically, I think, in the last 5 years or so and to me there's a few different arcs, but there's the kind of zero interest rates moment where I think what we saw was that rapid speed from an idea to become a company to sort of be in this growth curve, that friction was removed quite a bit. And so I think with zero interest rates, like venture capitalists were very willing to throw a lot of money at ideas to turn them into companies and push for that kind of growth ahead of efficiency. And then when the correction happened, what you saw was that people were looking at their unit economics and saying, like, oh gosh, these aren't so durable anymore. I have to think about efficiency. I have to balance efficiency and growth. And your number one line item in any P&L is usually your people expenses. And so all of a sudden, companies had to make these trade-offs. Do I want to build a durable business that can succeed from an efficient and sort of long-standing standpoint, or do I want to keep or invest in the people that I've brought on board? And that really, for me, for what I saw, shattered the incentive alignment. I was like, now there is a trade-off. We can't all win together. The company might need to make trade-offs in order to win that come at the expense of employees. At the same time, that's like the micro world. At the same time, in the macro world, you see this whole shifting of community and the perception of community worldwide because of the pandemic. And you see people kind of retreating into their subgroups and this like huge rise of the in-group, out-group identification. So people feel really much more attached to like their narrow world, their narrow subset. And so for what I saw as a people leader who sits in this sort of Venn diagram, that in-group, out-group became employers and employees. And now all of a sudden, you don't have a shared set of incentives. You don't feel like you can all win together. And now there's a question of like, well, who do I affiliate with? And, how does that kind of guide my decision making? And I feel like as a people leader who started out with that question of how do I help people work most effectively? It's like, how do you guide that conversation back together to the we all win together? We actually all want the company to be effective and for the people in the company to help make it effective so that we can create those outcomes that we were all striving for.
So building on that concept of an in-group and an out-group, which sounds so dystopian, doesn't it?
Well, you mentioned to everyone that I studied political psychology.
I know, and theater arts, by the way.
Yeah, well, and theater arts. That was a failed dream. That might be a different podcast.
I was going to say, yeah, can we make that the topic of a different podcast?
Yeah. How my fear of working in customer service led me to a lifetime of actually working in a different kind of customer service. That's a different podcast.
Oh, now you're just teasing. Okay, we'll have you back. We'll have you back for that discussion. So now enter AI, and I feel like talk about an in-group and an out-group. Now, a lot of employees are apprehensive. I mean, we're not sure if we should embrace a partnership with machines. Are they friend or foe? We've never really had that relationship with technology at work. If we embrace it, it'll improve our productivity. But are we then hastening the demise of our job or our career? And so, not to get too Marxist, but it's kind of labor versus capital or labor versus machines. And I feel like it might be perpetuating that idea of, I wasn't familiar with the term, but I like how you used it, the in versus the out group at work. How do you reconcile with that as you're growing organizations?
I have like a cynical view, which is that capitalism is inherently a very efficient process. And so companies need consumers and customers. And I think that's what will probably lead to more work being created, not less. That's like that's your political part. That's the philosophical,
I'm not sure that's
psychological part. But I think at the end of the day, this is part of why, at least for me personally, I'm so passionate about people leaders getting into this space and really thinking about how we can do human-centered design of AI at work. because at the end of the day, what I see is we had already started to grapple with this question of efficiency and how do you balance growth and efficiency, and how do you do growth and innovation and discovery in a way that is durable from a unit economic standpoint. That to me was the backdrop even prior to the leaps and bounds of technical development that's been occurring in the past 2.5 years. So then I look at, how does efficiency actually create possibility? And what are the things that we are actually now uniquely capable of doing that we weren't doing before? And I think one of the things I see when I look at how organizations operate is humans, we gravitate towards the familiar and the comfortable, the work we know, and the things we already do and do well and receive some amount of validation for. And that's why I think, to be clear, it's very threatening to imagine like that can be done so quickly by another technology. It's not that people hadn't embraced other technology before. It's just that this technology is actually iterating and developing much quicker. And so people are experiencing the shifts in that much faster, I think. But I think on the flip side, if you really get to take that kind of like beginner's mindset perspective, you actually get to ask yourself very curiously, well, what else? What is like the new future of work? What is the possibility that is created by that efficiency? And how do I get to reimagine my work and how my work gets done? And I think that there is a way for us to really shift some of the narrative away from like the dystopian, zero sum game into the what is next that can be created that we just never considered to be an option or possibility before. And that's what I've gotten to see since I get to use our company as like its own kind of lab. That's what I get to see internally when you take a very like AI first embracing of AI mindset, is all those things that get opened up and those opportunities that get created that didn't exist when you were gravitating towards the more comfortable and familiar, but also sometimes more routine and mechanical sides of your job.
So you and I share a common belief that you're allowed to do your best work. You deserve to be put in a safe place where you can do great work, and it's a celebration of the best version of humans. Work is. I think that yeah, please.
Yeah, I was going to say when I was at Flatiron, there's a term in like the medical space that you just made me think of, Dan, which is called practicing at the top of your license. Are you familiar with this? It's like how you design the workflow and organizational design of a hospital. It's like everybody should be practicing at the top of their license. If there is some set of tasks that you could do, but somebody else could also do it, then you redistribute the workload. If you look at like the way what doctors tackle, what nurses tackle, what physicians assistants tackle, and then like on downward. And so that's the same point for me. It's like I just believe that everyone should have the capability to practice at the top of their license. And so then you have to figure out where the other work goes. And this is like a way for us to really get to redesign that in a financially efficient way that companies can actually invest in.
I love that term. I'm going to reuse it with attribution liberally. So practicing at the top of your license. So let's say you're talking to maybe a new generation of employees, maybe graduating from school, and they maybe rightfully feel threatened by AI. But as you said, AI will create more work. So I don't think we're in danger of work going away, although some might dispute that. What's the conversation you have with maybe an early in career employee who isn't quite sure whether they should trust or not trust AI?
I think of two really big things at play with this, like kind of earliest kind of graduating generation right now. First of which is like the deep situational empathy of, I just read this piece yesterday, they call the most rejected generation. And it's just about how like the access to things has created such a volume of incoming applications to college, to jobs, that like the experience of rejection is actually much more prevalent in this generation. And it's like, I can see it too. Like LinkedIn's made it so easy to apply to a job. I open a job, it's, 24 hours, I have 1,200 applications. Like that means I have to reject, all but one of those people. And so the volume of rejection that people are experiencing because of that kind of change in access and availability has gone so up. So you've got from a deep situational empathy, you have people who are, I mean, rejection hardens you. And so you have people who are experiencing this level of kind of rejection at like an early sort of prefrontal cortex is still forming age. And so they're coming in already like, a little bit of maybe like a little bit of an aggression around like needing to like stake their own claim, prove their own identity, or a little bit of weariness and dejectedness of like, how am I supposed to get in there? And that I have like deep situational empathy for. And I actually think what I can see even already is that they are actually going to also come out of this moment in time being the most fluent in how to redesign the way that they work based on this technology, because they are not figuring out from like a sort of later stage, like beginner's mindset stage, and how to readopt it. They're just growing up with it. And so like then, as a parent, I have these conversations around, oh, my kids are cheating. My kids are cheating using ChatGPT for everything. Okay, well, I was cheating according to my parents when I started to use search engines to do my research instead of going to the library. It's like infinite knowledge and knowledge at your fingertips is a really scary thing for folks who had to work harder to acquire that knowledge and context. But I think academic institutions, this was your last guest actually that I was listening to, Dan, academic institutions have to radically shift in terms of how they teach critical thinking and problem solving and what you can do with that infinite knowledge. And so I would look to those early career grads to say, like, help me learn. Like, I'm still limited in my capacity to imagine what you can do with the problems that we're trying to solve or what new problems you can solve, because I'm still thinking about how to integrate and adopt a technology that is going to become commonplace to you. So you should look at the same set of problems that I have, and you should push my thinking, and you should challenge the way that work is getting done, because you're seeing it and feeling it like from the beginning and from the ground up, just like any other technology curve.
That's such a positive way to think about communicating why the new world of work is dependent on a new kind of thinking that the new generation is only going to bring in. It's unlikely that those who have benefited most from the current kind of incarnation of work are going to reinvent the work of work. I really like that. I haven't heard that
It's
before, but I think that's enlightening.
well, it's interesting to me because right now, on the flip side of that, we've been having a lot. Most of the people leaders I talk to, like the biggest thing people are concerned about is how do you train junior employees? Because there's this, sincere belief that the way that we all learned was to come up alongside other people who knew more than us, and they kind of taught us what they were doing by offloading some percentage of their work to us, and then we kind of observed it as it was evolving, and then we made it our own, and then we made it better, and then we ascended within organizations. And so we have these conversations of how are you teaching those skills and capabilities to people if they are not getting to do it themselves and do it alongside people who know how to do it? If those more senior and seasoned people have like AI bots doing their jobs for them, then what does that mean in terms of the learning and the mentorship and the coaching? But that's to me where it's like that's a group of us who that is how we learned, that is how we came up in the world, and that is and truthfully that is very much core to my own identity too. So I have the same like thought process. That's because we are not yet fully reimagining and re-envisioning how people learn and how skills get developed and what that looks like. And so the truth is we're so early in this moment in seismic shift that it's easier for me to take that sort of positivity and curiosity, and I want to see what happens, and I want to see how you empower people. I want to see how you empower the next generation to teach us something. It's easier for me to take that mindset because I know that what worked for me and the way that I built my own skills and the things that I've learned to date, I know that's not what, even my kids, heck, not even my kids, my cousins, are going to do coming up in the world.
So work is such a fundamental part of the human experience. And it's very realistic that certainly in this generation will experience work where you can do, call it, 40 hours of output, but in 32 hours or, whatever number you want to assert, 20% potentially of your time you could get back. And as a society, not as employers, but as a society, we get to choose. Does that mean we do 20% more work than we currently do? Do we uh, pursue a hobby? I mean, it's a question that the species has never been able to answer. And just, at a very existential level, like, what do you think? How do you think we manage that as people leaders, defining this new world of work? Like, are we changing the human condition? What happens to that delta of time that we're giving back with increased productivity?
It's so funny because I feel like this is actually one of the central tensions around AI adoption in workplace. Like, where does that work go? Because if I hear like my customers talk about this, and chief marketing officers at enterprise businesses, they will say like, "Oh, I heard that this made people more efficient," but like, I didn't see that. I didn't see that efficiency, or people like picking their kids up from school and going to their basketball game. There's like this inherent, maybe even not always suspicion, but there's this inherent question of like, where does time go? Who owns that time? Who belongs that time? Maybe because I was raised in the school of incentive alignment, I think that it's about your metrics for success as both an organization, I guess, then as a civilization. Um, I think if a company continues to set itself more audacious goals that could only be achieved through the introduction of things like AI, then where you see is the time goes back to the company to transform and create bigger things. And I think the only way that individual employees sign up for that value prop is if they feel like they also stand to win if the company wins. Otherwise, you kind of continue in this tug of war of, well, why should I give this time back to you? Like, what am I getting out of it from you as a company? And so I feel like we have to return to some place where we all win together, or we continue down that tug of war for a while.
So the political theorist in you says potentially employees may be offered by their employer 20% more compensation to do 20% more work, which will generate 20% more profits. You'd hope that that's the way that
Well,
a fair functioning market would evolve. I'm not sure that will
well,
actually happen.
I don't. 20% more compensation is a hard one. I think the equity structure of companies is probably the place that's going to end up needing the most interrogation versus like the more transactional parts of compensation. How do people feel like they share in the rewards of the company? And that in part goes to who's taking on the risk. I think during like zero interest rates culture, investors actually were taking on a tremendous amount of risk, and it really shifted how equity compensation worked, because people had to be able to see the ROI on the risk that they were taking. And so you ended up in a place where like a lot of positive outcomes wouldn't really clear the preferred stack of the way the rounds were set up. So I think that probably there's something around how equity gets looked at, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe the idea of equity just fundamentally changes. Political theorist, not compensation strategist over here. No, just kidding.
No, that's interesting. And you're probably right. I mean, certainly variable comp, equity or otherwise, that could be what fills the delta. It may not necessarily be that you get 20% more fixed compensation. Big experiment. I think nobody knows, but that's
Well,
good
at the end
insight.
at the end of the day, I think compensation is based on the value that you create for the company. It's a proxy of the value you create for the company, but also a proxy of the skills and tasks and activities that go into creating that value. And this is like a big topic amongst people leaders, is like we're going to have to completely re-examine the job architecture and sort of skills architecture of jobs as we shift the topography of teams and the sort of structure of organizations. So I'm very comfortable when I noted how to say I don't know. I don't know how the interdependencies thing will play out. That's part of the beginner's mindset and curiosity for me, is like going in there and actually re-examining from some sort of first principles, like how do I actually want to set up the structure of this?
Yeah. But we should celebrate that we get to have the dialogue,
Yeah.
right? It's so
Well,
important.
that's the fun of the future of work, right? That's the moment of evolution that we're
Yeah.
in.
So we can't have this very optimistic conversation about the future of work without also talking about the risks and what it means to exercise responsible AI. I kind of teed up this one in the fun fact, but would love to get the view of the world from Alex. What does it mean to exercise responsible AI?
Best analogy that I've heard that has really resonated with me is thinking about conscious consumerism in AI the same way that you would in other facets of your life. And so I think what terrifies me the most is that people who are most skeptical, most anxious, most conservative about some of the risks and questions of AI will just pull themselves out of the narrative entirely, and let the space be shaped by people who are more comfortable playing fast and loose with those things. Um, to me, the sort of conversation for me is how do we all take a role in defining this future? Because then the representative voices that are creating the technology and the representative voices that are using the technology, because those are the two things that usually shape the creation of technology, who builds it and who buys it, um, that's actually becomes the population that is asking the questions of what is the future of this? How does it get adopted? What does it get used? How does it get trained? What biases are ingrained in it? How are we thinking about some of the responsible deployment of it? How are we correcting for some of the places where the technology isn't ready to do some of the things we're doing with it? Like for everyone to engage in that conscious consumerism and to actually be a part of holding accountable like the whole ecosystem to really thinking about that's so important to me. Like we have a women's ERG here at Jasper, and we talk about the gender adoption gap in AI and how AI is used much less significantly by women than by men. And then on the flip side, we turn around and we talk about we're customer obsessed. We do so much based on customer feedback. We love learning from our customers and how they use it. Well, it's like if your customers look a certain way because your other customers aren't interested, then you're actually just missing that voice and that feedback cycle and that loop. And so I think for me, there are a lot of questions out there, environmental questions, institutionalized bias questions, decision make like the capabilities of nuanced decision making. And the only way for me to answer them is actually to go surgical on the specific use cases, the specific challenges, and show up as a participant and a consumer and asking those questions.
So kind of academically speaking, that makes so much sense. But like pragmatically, given all the risks you talked about, who's responsible for, just for one example, kind of rephrasing what you said, making sure that the future is equally accessible to all kinds of employees? Like, is that the employer's responsibility? Is it the employee's responsibility? Is it society's responsibility? Like this stuff, it's so latent, the bias, and it seeps into the only thing AI knows is what humans taught it. So let's not,
Mm-hmm.
let's not pretend that, it's AI magic. It's because we as humans are biased. But if we accelerate, or perpetuate these biases with AI, then who ultimately is responsible?
I believe that I believe we're all responsible for ourselves in the sense that I believe like if I bring an AI use case into my team as a people leader, then I am ultimately responsible for the outcome, whether or not it was enabled and assisted with AI. Just the same way as if my payroll software messes up somebody's pay, like it's my job to make it right. If I am hiring somebody on biased information and like the output is something that I would not be proud of and like would have held my team accountable for if I chose the software and I implemented it and I set it up without the right understanding of both the biases that might have been ingrained in it and also like the safeguards and human in the loop moments where we should have been checking it, then that's me as a leader who adopted that technology improperly. And like I think maybe I have trouble with the monolith of AI. Maybe it's like the applications and specifics of AI. So I think the foundational model providers are responsible for how they train the models. And I think the application layer is responsible for how we build it. And then I think the customers are responsible for how they implement it.
Good answer. Yeah, I think ultimately we need to think about accountability though, and think about not just what could go right, but what could go wrong. And as leaders, that's part of the new challenge of leadership is taking ownership, responsibility, building in guardrails, making that a part of a learning, a training culture, and doing that all in a way that celebrates, the new version of a
Well,
human.
yeah. I was gonna say, Dan, you just asked what are we gonna do with all this time back? This is where I think like work creates work,
Yeah.
right? I talked to the company once about the principle for me, like the principle of induced demand. So that's, colloquially like more roads equals more traffic. So
Yeah.
from an urban, from an urban planning standpoint, you think that if there's a lot of traffic on one road, you build a second road, you distribute the same amount of traffic between those two roads. Except that you don't, because the creation of another way to get somewhere means that people actually change their behaviors and more people come out of their houses and try to drive. Oh, there's a new highway. There must be less traffic. And then you end up with the same, if not more traffic. And that's kind of how I see the evolution of work. Every job that changes and shifts creates this other job. And so now, as a leader, I have this whole other existential set of things to, 5 years ago, I was really trying to figure out remote work and hybrid work. Now I have a whole different set of existential and governance and collective responsibility challenges to grapple with. And then they'll keep evolving. We'll feel good. We'll land on something, and then we'll open up the next frontier of that.
Brilliant answer. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. So, Alex, I got to get you off the hot seat, but you're not going anywhere without answering one last important question for me. So this conversation about human first AI and, bringing humanness back into work at a time when we're also bringing AI into work. These ideas that you've shared, I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's because you were inspired by great humans who are your role models. And, to the next generation, your kids, my kids who are listening, I believe that we'll always have human role models. Who are your role models? Who inspired you to be the leader that you are today?
I guess this is going to accidentally take things like full circle, because I think the kind of founding Google people leaders, like, my direct managers and sort of on upward, who basically all became kind of the dynasty of CHROs across Silicon Valley.
Exactly.
They taught me that the best way to have this proverbial seat at the table was to get so deeply invested in understanding the business and the work that was getting done that nobody saw you as like the HR lady. Everyone just saw you as a person who was trying to create a business outcome with the mindset of how you do that through people. And I watched, these folks like Arden Hoffman and Leanne Hornsey, like I watched these folks just completely take over the dynamic of a conversation by asking these incredibly incisive questions that synthesized so much context, but also brought this whole new perspective. And it gave me that empowerment from day one. Like, get yourself curious, ask questions, learn about the business that you are working in. Don't see yourself through the lens of a set of like programs or projects or initiatives. Those are just enablement tools. Go see yourself as like having the same seat at the table. And I had another boss, Carol Jensen, who is our first chief people officer at Flatiron, before I became chief people officer, who told me, don't be a decorative plant. Like, don't just sit in the meetings as if like you're there to absorb up all the information. Like, get in there and ask questions. And so now you see, like, I've been buoyed by that curiosity and that empowerment to just see that as a part of your role. And I think it's true for everyone. Nobody wants to invite someone to a meeting to be a decorative plant. And it really is our role and our goal, as people leaders, to really just think about how we understand deeply, fundamentally, everything that is going on in our organizations.
Great examples. Yeah, and to everyone listening, yeah, find a role model, find someone who inspires you and lights up your soul, right? That's an equally important part of the human condition.
Well,
Alex,
thank you, Dan.
yeah, this has been so much fun, and I'm going to take you up on the offer. We're going to come back and we'll talk about theater culture next time.
All right, deal.
We only got to half of Alex this time. Alex, where can the audience learn more about you and the great work that you're doing?
Oh gosh, I think just on LinkedIn. I'm still figuring out how to have these conversations at scale. So reach out to me if you wanna jam more on this stuff.
Brilliant. Thanks for hanging out.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Well, gosh, before we can wrap up, I should mention the reference to the episode that Alex made is the great conversation that at the time of taping, we just published with Dean Marchik, who's the dean of the Kogod Business School at American University. Great conversation about the future of education. If you haven't already listened to it, check it out. And gosh, that is all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. I'm your host, Dan Turchin from People Rain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.